When I first saw THQ reveal South Park Snow Day as the new South Park game, I was really skeptical, and after seeing the reviews, I was even more unsure of what to expect. This game got 8s and 9s, but it also got 3s and 4s. It's pretty rare to see something like that. Usually a game will get all high scores with a couple lower outliers, or really low scores with a couple higher outliers, but South Park Snow Day is literally all over the place. This weirdly actually kind of made me more excited to try the game out so I could form my own opinion. Making a review about a game that everyone agrees is great doesn't sound very fun, but making a review for a game that every single person seems to be having a different experience, that sounds like a video worth making. As a huge South Park fan, I plan to pick this game up regardless of what anyone said, and I went in with an open mind. Speaking of going in with an open mind, I think I should start by addressing the first thing that seems to come out of everyone's mouth when talking about this game. Why isn't it another RPG? I've seen a lot of angry South Park fans who feel like people aren't giving Snow Day a chance, and are instead making predetermined judgments based on the fact that it isn't an RPG, and I have a few different thoughts on that. First of all, let's look at the context of how this game was made. This game has almost no connection to anyone who worked on either of the RPG games, besides obviously South Park Studios themselves. This game is not developed by Obsidian or Ubisoft San Francisco. This game is being made by a much smaller team called Question. Question had only released 2 games before working on Snow Day, and from the very first reveal trailer, it was clear that this game did not have the same budget as those other 2 RPG games. What I'm trying to say is, are you sure you wanted this to be another RPG? Because I highly doubt it would have been up to the same quality as the games made by a legendary RPG studio and a Ubisoft studio with unlimited money. So I actually think it's good that they attempted something different instead of trying to recreate what had worked before with a smaller team and a smaller budget. And I would agree with fans who are angry that people aren't giving Snow Day a fair chance. However, I can also sympathize with those who are angry that it's not an RPG. First of all, the game did not do itself any favors by using the Stick of Truth theme and characters. It's understandable for someone to see Cartman in his wizard outfit and assume it will follow the same RPG formula. So when they watch the gameplay expecting an RPG and then get this, I can't blame them for being put off by it. And just in general, I don't like the decision to use the Stick of Truth characters and theme here. It feels kind of lazy to me. Almost like they didn't want to put in the effort to figure out new types of weapons or enemies, so they just went with what they had done before. South Park gives you so many different directions you could go in for a game, and to see them just stick with something they had done before is disappointing to me. It made the game feel kind of disjointed because a lot of what's happening actually has nothing to do with the fantasy theme. Throughout the Snow Day, you will find yourself collecting car keys to save Randy from an ice block, or collecting an NFT for Jimbo and Ned. None of those things are related to the fantasy game the boys are playing. It's just kind of random. And it reaffirmed my idea that using the fantasy theme was just lazy. I would have liked to see them go with something different for this game and think outside the box in terms of what kinds of weapons could be used instead of just falling back on swords and wands. The point I'm trying to make here is just that if you don't want people comparing this game to the RPGs, then don't use the same theme and character designs as the RPGs. But enough about that. Let's talk about the game itself now. South Park Snow Day is a 4-player co-op action game with light roguelike elements. The game centers around beating up the other kids and completing tasks in each level. As you progress through the story, you will unlock new weapons, abilities, upgrades, and cosmetics. Pretty simple concept, but what makes it unique? Well, each level begins with you and the enemies picking cards. These cards give upgrades to your powers and also introduce the bullshit mechanic. This allows for either side to use a crazy ability that can change the battlefield, like causing a meteor shower or making the player invisible. You can use these different cards and abilities throughout the game's story mode, featuring a classic South Park story that starts out small and eventually escalates to the point where the boys have to save the city. I have a lot of things to say about this game, good and bad, so let's just start with the gameplay. The gameplay here gets the job done. The combat is fun enough. You have your primary melee weapon, which just boils down to hitting the attack button over and over again. You can hold the button or use it in the air for slightly different moves, but it all does just come back to pressing the same button over and over. Meanwhile, you get one ranged weapon, which is used by holding down the trigger. This means that most of your time is spent doing these same 2 actions, which can get a bit stale. However, you do get to have 2 other abilities with you, and there is a much larger variation here. One can give you a healing totem, one gives you a fart that can lift you in the air, or one gives you the abilities to charm enemies to fight for you. This does help, but again, at the end of the day, it did start to feel like all the fights were the same, and that isn't helped by the fact that there isn't a lot of enemy variety either. I can almost count on one hand the amount of different enemies I face throughout the game. And while we're on the topic of lacking variety, this game is really lacking in content in general. This game has just 5 chapters in it, and they can be beaten in about 4 or maybe 5 hours. The developers clearly want you to keep replaying the levels and hope that you will be able to raise the playtime that way. However, I don't find myself wanting to replay the levels. Maybe if I had a friend who newly picked up the game, I could hop back in for another playthrough with them, but that's about it. And I can't really picture any friend group finishing up the chapter 5 and thinking, let's do it again, guys. Let's talk about the roguelike genre for a moment. Games that fit within this genre are games like The Binding of Isaac, Hades, or Enter the Gungeon. All of these games are similar to Snow Day in the sense that they are not necessarily long and they're meant to be replayed. But there's a reason why those other games work and why Snow Day doesn't. The best roguelike games are able to create a gameplay loop that is satisfying and rewarding. Each run you do will be somewhat similar, typically having you face the same types of enemies and bosses, but it never feels overly similar because there is such a wide variety of those enemies and different items. A game like Isaac motivates you to keep playing because each run you do can give you new unlocks, items, characters, and achievements. Meanwhile, a game like Hades doesn't expect you to beat the final boss on your first try. You're supposed to die because each time you die, you get upgrades and get stronger. And eventually you work your way up to being able to finish the whole game. But Snow Day doesn't do either of these things. The upgrades aren't required to beat these levels, you will easily do it on your first or second try. And when Snow Day only gives you 5 or 6 enemy types and a limited weaponry, it doesn't really fit into the Isaac archetype either. And I think that's why they never really marketed this game as a roguelike, because it doesn't really qualify. I think they just realized, damn, this game is super short, what do we do now? And then just tried to say it's meant to be replayed. A game that came to my mind a lot when playing Snow Day was the all-time classic indie game Castle Crashers. Castle Crashers was also a 4-player co-op action game, and I remember playing that game over and over again, and almost everyone I knew who had the game did the same, doing multiple playthroughs with their friends. I mention this because it shows that a game doesn't need to be a roguelike or have randomization to be replayable. It just has to be extremely well made and incredibly fun. Unfortunately, I can't really say Snow Day as either of these things, and so it didn't leave me wanting to come back for more. As for the story, it's pretty good. As I mentioned before, it's classic South Park, and if you're a big fan of the show like I am, you will be entertained here. However, I have to say, this game really isn't that funny. And the weirdest part is, it doesn't even seem like they tried to be funny. Because when I say the game isn't funny, I don't mean that the jokes don't land or that they're cringy. There just aren't that many jokes at all. When I researched for my video on the development of The Stick of Truth, I found that Matt and Trey really do not like hearing the same joke over and over again. They get extremely tired of it and start to feel like it isn't funny anymore. So perhaps they were hesitant to put too many jokes into this game due to the replayable gameplay loop. Maybe they felt like people would start to get really tired of the jokes if they had to hear them over and over again. But for whatever the reason was, it just makes the writing feel soulless, and it makes it feel like not that much effort was put in. And overall, it just makes the game not feel like South Park. Okay, so I've complained a lot, but there were some things I liked about the game. Going through the 5 chapters of the game the first time was fun, and I'm sure it would be even more fun with 4 friends. And despite its short length, I think it's important to mention that this is a budget title. The game only costs $30. Even the retail version is only $30, which is extremely rare to see for a brand new game. The developers acknowledged that this is going to be a shorter experience than your average $70 game and priced it accordingly. I have to give them some credit for that, and I also think the game should be judged with that price point in mind, especially since it will no doubt get even cheaper as it goes on sale in the coming months and years. For a budget $30 game, I feel like I got my money's worth. Was it worth the 7-year wait since the last South Park game? Absolutely not. But it was never going to be that. My conclusion would be, I think this game is really only worth playing for the absolute most diehard South Park fans out there. Especially if you have other friends who are also big South Park fans, I think you will have a good time. Before I end this review, I do want to note, it seems like they are going to be updating this game with new cosmetics, modes, or levels for the foreseeable future. Matt said in an interview that they plan to introduce content from new episodes to the game as they air. That could be really cool. Emphasis on the could be really cool though, because if it's just going to be premium cosmetics and stuff like that, I'll pass. But if they're going to introduce new levels based on the show, this could get really exciting. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But for now, South Park Snow Day is a painfully average game that I can't help feeling like could have been so much more with a bigger budget. If you've played South Park Snow Day, let me know what you think of it so far in the comments below.